on the, and so the meeting is now being recorded.
Alrighty, thank you, Katie.
You're
So
welcome.
I'm calling to order the Ad Hoc Sustainability and Resilience Committee of the Common Council. It's March 8th. It's 6:04. And this is our inaugural meeting. So welcome, everybody. And thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to do a call to order. I'll call out the names of the committee members. And then we have one Common Council member who joined us who's not on the committee. So Heidi Alterman is not here, we notice. But I do see Josh Goldstein, Dominique Johnson, Tom Keegan, Tom Livingston, Darlene Young, and I'm the chair, Lisa Shanahan. And I think you said, oh, and Diane Revolus, sorry, and Diane Revolus is here as a Common Council member. Thank you for catching my attention.
I thought I was on this committee.
You're not, but we're happy to have you.
Okay.
Absolutely happy to have you.
Sorry.
You're on the housing one, as I recall.
Gotcha.
That said, Katie, you said that there's nobody here for public participation, so we can move past that, or is there?
Actually, 2 people just joined.
Oh, okay. So we can, if there's anybody here for public participation who'd like to make any comments, this would be the time. Otherwise, we'll move forward with our meeting.
Diane Laura Celli has raised her hand.
Okay,
I'm
great.
going to allow her to speak.
Yeah, why don't you give her a chance to speak?
Diane, you should be able to speak.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Diane Lauricella, for the record. I just wanted to congratulate the council for creating this ad hoc committee. I was part of an effort to try to put something similar together about 8 years ago that didn't work out for many reasons. Please do not forget, and I hope after you've worked your, planned your priorities, to include the public in your work, because you have so many other responsibilities through either working groups or subcommittees. I hope that we will be able to fund a sustainability officer with proper credentials and a proven track record starting even before this July. I thank you for including public participation in tonight's meeting, and also your plan to create a community outreach plan to help with educate. I stand ready to help you, as I have for over 30 years, and I really appreciate this effort. I know you all are very busy, but I think this will really help Norwalk move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks for showing up tonight. Katie, is there anybody else who has their hand raised for public comment?
No, there is not.
All right, so we'll just move along with the agenda. The first thing that we're going to do is, I think I shared with everybody the proposed scope and the proposed responsibilities, which would be the committee charge for this committee. So I encourage everybody to take a look at it, and we can wordsmith it another time. I want to get right to Adam's work so we can let Adam get off for his dinner. But we can talk about it in more detail, but everybody has a copy of it. Generally speaking, our proposed scope is the following. The Ad Hoc Sustainability and Resiliency Committee will advise the Norwalk Common Council in its discussion and actions regarding initiatives, including but not limited to clean energy, resiliency, and conservation efforts. And what we imagine our proposed responsibilities would be the following. Participate in an audit of the city's energy, resiliency, and conservation efforts to create a climate action plan. This is where Adam comes in. Which will provide a detailed science-based and strategic framework for measuring and reducing the city's risks from natural and climate-related hazards and improve the quality of life of its residents. Review the climate action plan prepared for the city of Norwalk and prioritize recommendations for implementation to mitigate the impact of environmental change and to improve energy efficiency and conservation. Provide recommendations on environmental initiatives, energy savings, and conservation actions to appropriate Common Council committees for further action. Collaborate with city departments, city boards, and commissions to discuss, develop, and pursue environmental initiatives related to clean energy, resiliency, and conservation efforts. And finally, communicate the council and the city's efforts to mitigate the efforts of environmental change to the residents of Norwalk through a variety of public hearings and educational programming done in collaboration with local conservation groups and other experts. So with that said, what I'd like to do now is turn the meeting over to Brian Bedoli, who's going to introduce Adam Weschel, and then Adam will talk about the climate action plan that we've been working on for the last couple of weeks. Thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Definitely appreciate being here tonight and becoming involved with this effort. I think it's great that you all formed this ad hoc committee. I think it's great for the city and obviously great for the urban core, which is our sort of our role with the redevelopment agency. When this first started up, I was discussing a lot of this with Chairperson Shanahan regarding some of the past work that I had done in the Bridgeport region for the FEMA natural hazard mitigation planning process, as well as some climate mitigation and adaptation planning that we did post Hurricane Sandy, which was when I was there during my tenure. During my tenure there, we engaged with the Nature Conservancy quite extensively. We actually did one of these workshops that we're going to discuss tonight in 6 towns with great success, a lot of great feedback, really representing a really pragmatic approach to climate action planning. I know that you all have great ideas in terms of where you want to take all this, but we found this is a really good first step to sort of take an inventory, identify where you're at with your climate action planning and resiliency planning, and bringing in Adam Welchel from the Nature Conservancy, who you'll hear from tonight, to host a workshop, a facilitated workshop to really kind of get a handle on the existing projects, priorities, exposure to hazards, both now and in the future. So Adam has been great to work with for a number of years. We're really excited to have him here in Norwalk. And he'll walk you through tonight some of the work that the structure of the work that we're proposing for Norwalk, and hopefully get your feedback and kind of talk out the process. So I will quit talking and I will give it over to Adam, who I know you're in good hands with.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second because I need to let the minutes show that Ms. Alterman joined the meeting. Turning it back to you, Adam.
Geez, well, thanks so much. Yeah, my name is Adam Welchel. I'm the Director of Science with the Nature Conservancy here in Connecticut. And yeah, Brian and I go way back. I had the privilege of working with Bridgeport and pretty much every community in Fairfield County so far. We actually had spent some time with your fine emergency management staff and a few others planning back 2014 or so. And we actually did an abbreviated version of this community resilience building workshop process that I've had the pleasure of working or talking through that process with a number of you to date. Yeah, so this is, given the context that Lisa just provided with this ad hoc committee, this really does feel like a perfect fit in terms of first steps, as Brian mentioned. It's a great way to initiate a process like you're planning. It's the principal objectives of the community resilience building process, or simply stated CRB, is really about bringing you together as a community. You define who you'd like to have in a workshop, and we are thinking about an in-person workshop, which seems absolutely novel at this point. We've been doing these online for, I don't know, since we've been doing these workshops for about 10 plus years now, but we've been doing 30 or so since COVID, the pandemic started. So we're really looking forward to an in-person affair. The principal objectives of a CRB workshop, once you've defined who you'd like to have there, is to really get in touch with what you feel are your top hazards for the city. That could be flooding, heat, whatever it might be that you find a priority. Spending time together, identifying the strengths. There's a big emphasis on the strengths. What have you done that already works well? And the pandemic has really proven out a lot of approaches that are worthwhile in this regard. We do spend time on vulnerabilities. Once we've identified strengths, vulnerabilities, we walk through and help you identify actions that can reinforce strengths or reduce vulnerabilities. And then we get into the hard stuff of actually taking a look at what tends to be a rather long list of potential actions and helping you identify priority actions that can become ideally kind of the playbook or the touchstone for the work that you would all do moving forward and operationalizing different priority actions and really making it part of what the city of Norwalk is and what the city of Norwalk becomes in the context of resiliency, sustainability, and equity as well. So it's a really good platform. It's a perfect first step, as Brian pointed out. We've had the privilege of working with a large number of municipalities, over 450 across 11 states with this specific process. It's been pushed and pulled and challenged in a lot of ways, and we've got it down to a very good and efficient and effective process now. that gets you from where you're at to something that's useful and usable in terms of building a long-term and integrated climate action plan. I will just mention that we really view this process as both additive and complementary. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to lift up all the good stuff that you've already done in terms of your hazard mitigation plan, your plan of conservation development, any other, master plans like parks, whatever it might be. We really want to integrate that into the process and make sure that we're lifting up all those, all the hard work and all the people that have been involved with that, and really be additive and complementary. It does take a community. So we've really been asking the core team that's been assembled, and many of you that are on that core team are here today, to identify who you want to have at the workshop so that we're making sure we're getting a broad suite of voices to both recognize and realize what Norwalk is today, but also, have those folks involved with developing and making decisions about what Norwalk becomes in the future. So again, we're really privileged to be here. The Nature Conservancy has been around for 70 years in Connecticut. We plan to be around for another 70 years. So think of us as a partner, not just through this process, but also going forward. And we're here for the long term. And we really feel like this process can really help you, particularly where you're at and where you want to go in the short term with developing a climate action plan. So that's kind of like the thumbnail.
Yep, that's the thumbnail. We should also mention that this is something that you do gratis to municipalities. I can't say the word tonight. And that's just such a wonderful gift to the city of Norwalk. We're so appreciative of that. Just to let the rest of the committee know, I guess, Brian, we could talk a little bit about the core team and some of the work we've done already just to get this put together to some degree.
Yeah, of course. So we've been working to set up the workshop with Adam. As he identified, there is a sort of a planned out process that's very easy to work with. The first step is identifying the core team, which has been identified as Chairperson Shanahan, Councilman Livingston, Jess Vonashek, myself, Steve Kleppen will be helping out in Jess's absence while she's out, Alicia King, and then also representatives from DPW. And really that just serves as the administration function of the exercise to make sure that we're keeping things moving. The first task that we've been assigned is this community characterization survey, which we actually have an initial draft. Basically what that's doing is kind of just providing the Nature Conservancy a snapshot of where Norwalk is today, both in terms of its composition, its characterization, but also some of the things that you've done already from resiliency planning to try to take that inventory on the front end so that when we go into the workshop planning phase or the workshop phase, you're really hitting the ground running. So, from my personal experience, having done a number of these with Adam, the conversation, as I said, is really pragmatic and focused. It's an opportunity for us on the operations side at city staff level to get all together with local leaders, municipal officials, elected officials, key stakeholders, and have an active conversation about the hazards we're experiencing today and how they may be impacted by climate change and moving down the road in the future. Really, sort of a condensed process, and again, setting the foundation for the larger climate action planning that I know you all are interested in doing. So we have the administrative function, and then we have the sort of group that we're assembling as part of that for invites. But and Adam could probably speak to it a little further. The process is designed for even further outreach. So we're working on surveys to try to include as many people. But really, the focus is in why there's a limited number that we've sort of identified, and Adam's identified through the hundreds of municipalities that he's worked with, is really just trying to narrow that discussion, narrow the universe, so that we're making sure we're getting the most distilled information out of the process. So I don't know if there's anything else you want me to touch on, or if that
No, I think that's it. I think that part of it is we really want to get the staff expertise in the room so that we have, the information so Adam can really get the information he needs to help us craft a plan. Any questions from the committee that you'd like to ask Adam or Brian about where we are so far? I think we're about to I guess you'll be sharing that draft with us while we have you online pretty soon, right? Brian?
Yeah, we sent out the initial draft today. We just copied you. We're having some internal circulation. We had an internal discussion on it with some staff, and then we'll have that finalized.
Great. Any questions, anybody?
Do you want to just give an outline of the timing of this so everybody knows?
Oh, yeah. Can you do that for us, Adam?
Yeah, so the process really begins with the consent of leadership, and we have that in place with a core team set up, and we've had our kickoff call. So the core team is, in a kind of a grace period, typically about 2 weeks to complete the initial tasks of that community characterization survey, and then the participant worksheet. From that, we get the invites out, which is, depending on how typically these days, 4 to 5 weeks from invitations going out to actual workshop. And then my team will take all the information from the workshop and synthesize it into what we call a summary of findings report. It's not really a plan, it's really a summary of findings from the workshop. And that usually takes about 2-3 weeks at this point. So we will, and again, to Brian's point, it's meant to be efficient and effective and quick. Give you some raw materials from which you can go forward and really create that climate comprehensive and more meaningful climate action plan. So to answer your question, Lisa, we've had our kickoff call. If we're probably looking at the latter part of April, early May for a workshop, which would mean that you'd have your summary of findings report back by no later than the end of May.
Which really gives us a chance to then begin to make priorities and get our work started. Josh, it looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, so just so I think everyone is clear here, there's the workshop, there's the summary of findings document, which is something that you and Adam, you and your team is going to compile. But the result of the document isn't actually a climate action plan, it's just a summary. And then do you work with us on the climate action plan, or are we sort of left to our own devices to sort of create a plan from the materials that you've provided?
Good question.
Yeah, that's correct, Josh. So we'll return to you a summary of findings report. We'll work with you, and it'll be in final draft form. So we'll iterate and make sure it's of you and for you and how you would like it. But yeah, I mean, there's a limit to the amount of pro bono capacity I can provide, and that's really it. I'm happy to work with you on developing a more elaborate climate action plan, but I couldn't be in a leadership role on that. It'll be more kind of like support, technical support, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and just
does a summary of findings.
I can just give you a little bit of background on that, Josh. The thought is that this program that Adam can do, it's a great kickoff for us so that we're not waiting a year to get findings, and we can actually take some of these suggestions and start implementing right away. And if we decide that what we see in the report is something, we want something bigger or broader, then we could at that time go out to try to get a formal climate action plan. But it gives us some goals to hit sooner rather than wait a whole year for the RFP and then.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not poo-pooing this. I actually think this could be a very valuable exercise for the city. The thing that I just wanted to understand, and I think I'm pretty clear on this now, is the summary of findings sort of helps us set the stage. But what I am not hearing is that the summary is going to include, say, like recommendations about things the city should be doing. So sort of helping sort of guide us, or is this going to be sort of a summary of like a lot of sort of the really important things, but frankly things we are pretty aware of, rising coastlines, increased flooding, I mean, sort of, I'm trying to get a sense of, are you going to sort of guiding us on the path, and sort of the runway towards a climate action plan? That's sort of what I'm trying to get here.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Yep. We'll be providing you with priority actions, things that they'll be a little light on, the who, what, when, and how much, but you will have a suite of priority actions that you've decided are really things the city ought to move forward on. And then you'll have a kind of additional actions that are secondary, given the group that's assembled, but you'll have pretty meaningful actions. I can forward you or the core team can provide you with the example of the summary findings report from Stanford, from Bridgeport, comparable cities, city of New London, for example, to give you an idea of the depth and the breadth of the types of actions that come out of a workshop like this. I think you'll be surprised, Josh. It's time well spent. You really walk out of there with some pretty meaningful and quickly operational type of actions. assuming that the folks that show up are really giving their all and really into it, which I have no fear in the city of Norwalk that'll be the case.
Well, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
And Josh, if I may, I just as a workshop participant in a number of these, I think, if we could kind of equate this to sort of the fire starter log in a way. And I think, having been involved in much larger climate action plans as well, I think where this really provides a lot of value is, when you start these efforts, you obviously want to identify existing conditions, what's been done, what people in operations are doing. I'm a firm believer, if you want to solve a problem, talk to the people that deal with it every day. And I think bringing that all together into one room really jumpstarts that process. So rather than pay staff hours to a consultant to kind of identify all that, we're going to have done that as a group on the front end in one day, and then be able to bring that to the whatever consultant or however it blossoms from there.
Dominique, it looks as though you have a question, Ms. Johnson.
Oh, I do. Josh, I had a couple, but that was Josh asked one of mine. Thank you, Josh. The other piece, so I'm hearing prioritization, which is very good, because I know that's something that when we've been talking about this, we need to know what we need to focus on first, right? So is this summary of recommendations and the work you'll be doing going to be telling like who owns what, or is that something that then I assume like the chief of staff of the mayor and perhaps this committee can help the city decide who owns what actions? Will it go that deep into the weeds there, or?
Not quite.
Okay.
It'll really be the key step in this all is compiling a core team. The core team is really essential in not only preparing for the workshop, but also taking some ownership, or at least coordinating the operationalization of actions on the back end. Right. It's more of a question for the core team to work with the larger community, perhaps the folks that you mentioned, the offices you mentioned, to figure out who's going to do what. But it also provides a bit of an a la carte for other NGOs or other support organizations that can step up and say, that was a really important action that came out of that workshop, and I'd love to champion that and build that into my work plan. So it while it doesn't get into the actual, identifying specifically who, what, when, and where, and how much, provides you with the raw materials that are easily, realized through the work of the core team and others.
Okay, I'm hoping that our committee, I hear core team, but I'm hoping our committee can have a real role in
Yeah,
that too.
yeah.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. And one more question. I know we've talked about this a lot internally, but I know from the work you all have done and sustainable CT as well, that equity needs to be centered in at the root of all this. So I was wondering if you could just speak to that just a little bit. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sustainable Connecticut's been our key partner on this, and while TNC's taking the lead on this, they'll be part and parcel, and I'll try to get as many Sustainable Connecticut folks as I can on the team. Yeah, so it starts, one of the key things is really starts with who you invite to the workshop. There are people that make decisions, those that make decisions happen, and those that have to deliver the decisions of others. And we really want to make sure we get that, quote, third group of people represented. Neighborhood organizations. I'll be critiquing your participant workshop worksheet. I want to see faith-based communities. I want to say a broad opportunity for folks to be involved, really getting voices from the neighborhoods, from what's going on. Often they tend to be very powerful voices. So it starts there, and then we'll look to build that in as we go forward. There is a really cool and important equity toolkit that Sustainable Connecticut offers up to communities. We potentially could take a look at that prior to the workshop, just to kind of make sure we're prepared and ready to address questions such as, do you have a homeless population? Can we dig into that and really get some deep understanding as to what's going on there? And I should mention that there are 3 categories that we tackle in the workshop. They include infrastructure, which often can be the beginning and the end of conversations about resiliency, bridges, roads, culverts. But we get into societal needs, related to vulnerable populations in your community, and then the environment. And the social and the environment tend to be components that really speak to equity and really are unfortunately left off the table quite frequently in conversations in urban environment around, mostly about infrastructure. But so participation and really stretching the breadth of the conversation to include societal and environmental needs as well gets us into equity.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Adam, for saying that, because you're right. My concern has always been we go about doing this so that the most affected people and places in Norwalk are centered and they are prioritized. So I feel like that setting that tone right from the start is going to be crucial. So I appreciate that from you. Thanks so much.
Ms. Young, you've got your hand up now.
Yes, I do. So I want to thank Ms. Johnson for asking that question, because I was going to ask that. And thank you, Adam, for answering it. And I hope we can somehow include that in the description that you presented. I mean, we don't have to go into great detail, but I think equity is key. And I think the way that we describe it, what it is we're trying to do, will definitely impact how people show up. And so if I were to read what we just presented, any piece of that and trying to persuade people to participate, I think it's lacking that piece about equity and how what we are trying to do impacts people on a personal level. So I think it's part of the message on how we are going to attract those folks that we want. We need to look at that, but I would hope that some of that is included in what you presented when we wordsmith that what you presented us.
Yeah, that would be really important to include in the invitation. That's a very good point. That piece.
Now, Adam, one thing that it might be to the group's benefit, and maybe you could speak a little bit to how it's used currently. I know I'm going back to 2015, the last time I did one of these with you. But I recall there was a really powerful mapping tool, the coastal resilience tool, that included social vulnerabilities. You kind of identified those sensitive populations. And then with the work you did with NOAA, you showed how sea level rise or flooding projections would actually affect them over the long term. Is that still part of the discussion? And maybe even just talk about the mapping and all that sort of the interactive things that go on with the workshop, maybe of the benefit to the group.
Yeah, Brian, there have been some improvements to the information that's available, but social vulnerability indices, overlaid census block information kind of gives you somewhat of a higher level, somewhat crude kind of understanding as to where the principal risks and challenges are, as well as opportunities. We can certainly build that into an in-person workshop. The online workshops tend to be a bit truncated because you're just you're working against it's this, versus being actually in person. So in the in-person workshops, we have more time together. And then we try to bring in as many maps as we possibly can to help people better understand and inform the kind of decisions that they want to make. And then we also have a participatory mapping exercise. We'll roll out a big map of the city of Norwalk and ask people to, circle, describe, their experiences and their expertise, and knowledge about where they live and where they work and all that. So there's while we use data and maps and science to help inform and give people stuff to reflect on and use, one of the real key exercises is doing that participatory mapping, which can be really enlightening, liberating, and can really serve as a good communication, a good way for people to communicate around place. So we try to take advantage of that little exercise. Did that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, I know that was very helpful. And I think just for the benefit of the group, we're really working to pull together anecdotal evidence and things that can help feed this discussion. So the more we can hear from you all, the better. So we can make sure that that's getting moved forward.
And this report will be fully vetted by this committee. I think that's where this report will sit, and then we'll decide the priorities based on what's been recommended by Adam and Brian's team. So I want to make sure everybody that's going to be our role, I think.
Yeah, just real quick, while we're compiling and serving as the vehicle through which your report, your summary of findings is generated, it's really your work. You know, we approach our underlying philosophy in all this is really to make sure that we know we're doing our job right. If people feel as if they've been heard and they've contributed, and if we do that correctly, then we're helping you strengthen relationships and building trust. That's our basic kind of golden formula for this whole thing. And, you know, one of the key intangibles that we're always trying to create is momentum, which is an elusive thing that can evaporate very quickly. But, you know, we're trying to help you strengthen relationships, build trust, and ideally that leads to momentum. That's really our main goal with this whole thing. And along the way, give you a return to you a competent, synthesized kind of summary of actions that have been both, you know, have been prioritized by you. There's no ownership on our end. We're just trying to reflect and return to you yourselves, so to speak.
Exactly. Other thoughts, comments, or questions? Oh, Dominique's got her hand up again, Ms. Johnson.
Just a comment, because I failed to adequately thank you for doing this, especially pro bono. And I am just so grateful for the partnership and for the work you're going to do for us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hopefully I haven't built up expectations too high. We'll do our best.
Brian's your champion, so I think it's Brian's fault if expectations are high, because he's been championing your work for.
Been this hype man for a while now.
But we really are, as a city, we're super grateful to the Nature Conservancy, not only for this workshop, which we think is going to be really powerful, and it's a great kickstart for this committee. We're really grateful for that. But we also are really grateful for that gift that you gave us from your group also this spring, which I think that the committee, the council accepted in the spring. So thank you for that. And thank you for keeping Norwalk front of mind for trees and grants. We really appreciate that too.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good. So can we let Adam go, or is everybody satisfied that they've got their questions answered?
Yes. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you so much, Adam. Have a nice dinner. All right, so the second thing that we had talked about when we were just even conceiving the whole idea of this committee was public outreach. And that while while the Nature Conservancy is off doing their work on our climate action workshop, what should we be doing to keep ourselves busy in the 2 or 3 months that it's going to take to get that all wrapped up? And one of the conversations that Dominique and Josh were part of was, we should probably go out into the community and start raising, fertilizing the ground for these conversations in the community. So we talked about that, and I thought I would just open up a conversation with all of you about, do we still think that's a good idea? What are the types of things that we feel like would be good conversation topics for different parts of the city? Should we do it one district at a time, or 3 or 4? I know we're, Josh, right before I call on you, I know we're doing a lot of public outreach right now, and Josh is part of it with Tom on other issues. So I don't want to overwhelm the public with too many things to look at. So with that said, Josh, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, very briefly, I think that one thing that the Nature Conservancy's work, I think, is going to probably, reveal is that there are a couple overriding pressing issues. Equity being chief among them, second being flooding, and third really being sort of issues with our coastline and the river. I'm sure there are a million others that we can talk about. But in terms of, I think, what is affecting people the most on a day-to-day basis, and this is something that we certainly learned from voters as we went door to door during the campaign, those 3, frankly, are the top 3. And I think that when we think about a public outreach strategy, and obviously we're going to have to sort of think about how we do this, but both and in an in-person and probably some sort of a hybrid format, hear from the public what the pressing problems are. I think there are going to be things that we expect to hear, and there probably will be things that we hear that we don't expect. And I think that one of the key things that a lot of the experts and Brian and your team, we're going to have to figure out how to react to, which is dealing with both the expected and the unexpected, and be flexible. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to expect. I think in terms of format, we're going to have to work that out. But the function should be very simple.
So I'm a little curious, and maybe because Dominique and Darlene spoke about it, how would you suggest to us to think about equity conversations regarding environmental and conservation issues, and where should we do them? What should they, how do we draw that community in? Do you have thoughts?
I mean, I have to think about it a little bit. I mean, you speak to the flooding. I mean, there's those things that are impacting those communities. We may even have to talk about, other things that impact, the environment or the community, whether it's the types of businesses that come through the area with tractor trailer trucks. I mean, you're going to have to speak to people's everyday experiences in certain areas. I mean, those are the things that are impacting people in some areas, right?
Darlene, I think we've also talked about things like contractor yards.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I mean, it's, and
well, those
I think stuff
contractor
like that
yards
is
bring those trucks, and so
true.
that's where those trucks are going. The types of businesses, zoning. I mean, all those types of things are harsh realities.
So if I could, I'm just to sort of follow up on Lisa's question. So in terms of the four, I mean, I understand this. I guess I'm struggling with how do we go out? Do we go out like a listening tour? What does it mean? How do we get people? I think, Lisa, that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Do we just have community meetings where we ask them what's on the top of your mind? I mean, I'm just thinking about how we go about doing this and actually getting.
I think you were saying that. I mean, I think to my point of how are you going to engage people, and you have to kind of speak to those issues when we're talking about this overall plan. Because if you just say resiliency and that how we are presenting it, there's no connection there. So in some people's mind, they can't make that connection. So you're going to have to speak to each district.
That's,
you know what I mean? But tie that in and find a way to tie that in. But how do you do it? I don't know about, I mean, people are already going to meetings. They're Zoomed out, they're meeting out. And so I don't know how many individual meetings we want to have. But, I think we try to keep it to a minimum.
So if I ask, I know there's the question or hands up. So if we said like the general topic of this meeting, just pick a neighborhood, flooding in Wall Street area, flooding in South Norwalk. And then, that's the focus. And then we have sort of subcategories, something like that is what I think I hear you saying. Yeah.
And let me just ask one more question, then we'll go to some questions. So bringing in an expert to talk about those things, is that the draw? And then you make it broader by bringing in these other conversations, or is it just listening, do you think? I mean, how do people view that? And it's sort of a general question, and I'll ask Dominique to speak next because she's got her hand up, and then we can.
I mean, I think it's going to take a couple of different ways because you have to know your audience, right? And so some people are more versed on and up on what resiliency and the sustainability means, or climate action plan. Like when you say that, people are going to think in certain areas, what do you mean? And so we just have to be specific and really say that what we're trying to do incorporates all those other issues that people are dealing with. And so how do you talk about that? If flooding is an issue, from South Norwalk to where Tom, you mentioned, is it West Ave? If that's the issue, flooding, we can bring those communities together because we're all kind of almost dealing with the same thing. But you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that we want to have too many committee meetings. I just don't think we need to do that. And bringing an expert in makes sense, I think, to me.
Dominique, you've got your hand up for a little while. Do you want to go next?
Yes, no, I agree with what Darlene's saying. And I would add too that, and we've talked about this a bit, some people know climate like right away, what we're talking about. And other times you say green, then that clues in for people. But I think we can't make any assumptions about the language people are using to describe their lived experience with this. And so part of that will mean maybe we just have to have conversations around air pollution as well. Right. I mean, PCI didn't pass, but we know people have higher incidence of asthma that live around
Right.
95, you know, like there's those kind of things that we can talk about, that, you know, whether you can bike or walk, you know, in your neighborhood, like, and feel safe doing so. Like, that's all climate, that's all like green, but we have to maybe strip that away in some way to talk about these everyday issues, and that may help too, right? So
So I'm going to ask Heidi to ask her question, then I might want to ask Brian if, what his experience in Bridgeport along these issues were. So Heidi, why don't you ask your question, and then we'll go to Brian give Brian a little chance to think about it.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to say about the equity, is it possible to start, at least with these meetings, start using the language line so that we can offer translation services, especially Spanish and Haitian Creole, since those are English, so there's the 3 languages in Norwalk that are main. I don't know if that is difficult to do, but I think it's important to me, like, to try to have it at least at the meetings where you're doing outreach. And any meeting that's going to have, perhaps something major, but aside from that, a quick thing, I don't know who would be in charge of this, and I don't know if it's even possible. When I was campaigning with Lucy Dathan, she had this questionnaire that she was giving to constituents, and it was just a QR code. And then it took them to a survey where they could quickly fill out questions. That could bypass having to have a bunch of meetings. If you somehow distributed those or just put them up on poster boards. That's all. Thank you.
It's a good idea. So Brian, do you have thoughts about how we can do public outreach, and especially with communities who might not necessarily be conversant with some of the terms we're using?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts based on some of the work in Bridgeport, but even here in South Norwalk, and I'd be interested to hear Darlene's reaction. With the South Norwalk TOD study that we're kind of wrapping up, we set out on one path, and then we quickly realized that we needed to figure out a new strategy for getting that sort of real focused outreach to economically distressed or different the community advisor, those part of the community. And what we ended up doing is we created with District B and all that, the Community Advisory Committee. So it was really just trying to get some champions around that topic. And then you could use that sort of to serve as brand evangelist to kind of spread the word and get people. It doesn't have to be a closed group like the South Norwalk TOD, but that might be something you all want to consider by structuring a little bit more formality around it with people that are interested in the issues, and then working with them to try to promote it and get more people involved and interested. So that's just one idea. We did the same thing in Bridgeport, and it was helpful. I mean, we found that people say different things when the meeting's targeted around, their specific interests as opposed to generalized. And, what do you think about this? So I think it takes a little extra work. It takes a little extra effort. I mean, we did what, Darlene, 6 meetings probably that were above and beyond, but I don't think we would be at where we are today without that.
And I have to say, I think, people appreciate that. And I think and we just have to be honest about it. It's about building relationships and building trust, because a lot of times these sorts of things, we have check the box meetings. And so we come around, we ask a question, things may or may not happen. But I think in this case, we really, Brian and his team really came out and connected with the community. So, and we've just got to be flexible. So.
And I think there's opportunity in this discussion for that, definitely, to get, it's targeted outreach ultimately. I mean, you're going to have these general broad brush sort of approaches, but there's going to be things that come up that you need to drill down deeper, and you want to work with certain people to help you do that. You can't just try to, take it all from the start and figure it out. And it kind of happens a little bit organically, as we noticed. To the question about the language, we're happy to look into that, however the group prefers. We were able to do this first South Norwalk TOD meeting in Haitian Creole, Spanish. There is a cost attributable to that, so we'd have to figure out, what that looks like. I know that there's a service the city was starting to partner with around the time, which may help mitigate that, but we're happy to, in the role we're playing from a staff support, to look into that, because there's a lot of value there for specific meetings. But yeah, I think surveys, and I think, trying to drill down and really just working with and identifying which Adam will critique who we select will help get us to that point on the front end to try to get people that we may not be thinking about, or that, traditionally may not be involved in this discussion, that we want to make sure are involved.
I'm muted again. Darlene, do you think that, with that model that Brian just talked about, community advisory committees, is that something that you can be helpful with putting together something for South Norwalk? For sure, we'll have to find other parts of the city too, but using that model?
Yeah, I think so, and Diana, and I think the rest of us, Josh, I think we can get something going, and particularly, you know, we've had pretty good success with that, and with District B, starting out with our District B group, and then kind of branching off from that. So I think we can definitely get something going. So
Yeah, that's a really crucial part because there's so much impact of air pollution, health
Right.
outcomes, and flooding all in
Right.
District B. So it's a real focus. It should be a real focus of the city.
Okay.
Diana, do you
guess-
have thoughts about that?
Sorry.
Looks like Diana just came.
I'm in the background listening like, yes, yes, yes. Come to the community, speak to them, maybe engage in a way that it's an event, you know, look at it a little bit more of, you know, bringing a mic in a space and a place and just really not being afraid of just coming into it. You're asking how to speak to them, just come to them. So being inventive to how to get to the community. Yeah, most definitely would like to be a part of that. And I think District B, again, equates to all of these issues, and just being able to have some fun, have some food, and have some voice in their voice, I think would be a great situation to get people to come.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other thoughts about community outreach and topics for that purpose? All right. I think what we'll do is, oh, Dominique.
Well, I was thinking if we're going to do other areas of the city, to obviously tap into our council colleagues who represent those districts. I know we've talked about this offline. And as well, we do have like some commissions that I think any of the commissions that are under the climate green umbrella, we'd have real partners in them. I know there's a growing coalition of community organizations that are involved in doing the Earth Day celebration this year. So like a very big tent, I think would be helpful in that regard too, right? So.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I was going to ask Gwen, next I was going to say, you know, what other activities should we be undertaking while we're waiting for this climate workshop to come along and go out? Do people have ideas? Diana, you've got your hand raised, and then Mr. Livingston.
He might have something to say towards that question. I was going to ask you guys a question. So, Mr. Livingston, if you want to go first, that's fine. I can wait.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, you went first. I was just going to say, just following up on, I think the comment you made, Lisa and Dominique, that, I mean, partnering with organizations, we should think about, I know Louise Washer and her group would be a great one. I think it's a way to sort of start us off in this process. I think some neighborhoods are going to require more focus and targeting than others, and some issues are more relevant to some than others. So to the extent we can, I don't want us to, I wouldn't want us to spend, you know, months trying to figure out how to get started. If the ways we can tap into organizations that are already doing something along the lines of what you just said, Dominique. And if
Yeah,
there's
and
any way, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The last thing I would say, if there's any way, and it's probably, well, Earth Day's coming up too soon, but I mean, if there's any way we can sort of make some sort of announcement then of sort of a plan, not necessarily events, that would be, I think that's always a good day to sort of tap into. But anyway.
Yeah, it'd be great to do some work around that. Just, I was going to say one more thing before we move to Diana's thought, because it's along Mr. Livingston's lines. I was wondering if this group has things that they want to learn. Should we be bringing some experts in to bring us up to speed on topics and what those topics might be? I generally can find people to bring us some education stuff. You know, we can have the press cover some of these conversations so that it gets into the newspaper. So, and we don't have to decide what those topics are this minute, but if anybody has some ideas about that, I think that might be a good use of some of our time too. So Diana. So
my question to this committee is this. One of the ways, especially with residents that's called, is there data points to the residents who have called into City Hall with complaints, right? That's a great way to get the voices of what has been complained. Because like, for example, I know Meadows Garden, they get a lot of points in particularly about getting calls about, you know, the dust or cleaning or whatever. So is there a way to get customer service or have a some type of collection of data of the calls we get in for customer service or complaints in with our residents, or when they use the app, you know, when they're taking pictures of certain things, because that could be a start. Even where you have, if you do have a committee, at least they could see like what's being complained about the most and where, you know. Just wondering if that's an ability for this committee to maybe look into.
That's a good question. One thing I do know, I think, Tom, you sit on DPW's commission too, is that certainly for flooding, they actually do collect those complaints and they map where they're getting complaints. And so they have a pretty good sense of, you know, where the watersheds are, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea because that really gets an idea of what's on people's minds, at least people who are speaking out. We can talk to customer service and see how they track it. I know it's tracked differently, as Lisa said. The DPW has a very detailed record of flood complaints, but I don't know to what extent the other complaints are logged. We'll have to look into that. I think it's a great way of looking into these issues.
All right,
We'll certainly
thanks.
look into that.
Vanessa had mentioned something on our core team call. I think, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the one thing I can offer too, just to the overall group, and I know Lisa, we had started the conversation, is just sort of some of our research abilities. So we have been pulling together, and we actually have an initial draft that I want to go through. Kind of wanted to hear from you all where your heads were at on certain things and at the start of this meeting, but what other councils and other places are doing in this regard. So you could have some sort of idea of the menu of options. So we'll be working to pull that together for you all concurrent to this discussion. And also, I mean, one of the things too we can start looking at is, you know, kind of gearing up and thinking ahead to what comes out of the, you know, prioritized list of actions through the workshop, is starting to take a look at what sort of climate action plans you like or you dislike or things. We could start kind of polling those and you know, hit the ground running when you guys are ready if you want to go down that road.
Yep. So Brian, do you have a sense of how Stanford and Bridgeport used the work of the Nature Conservancy? And, you know, can you talk a little bit about that? Is that, you know, kind of as a preview for what we should be thinking about?
Yeah, well, I think the most beneficial is it fed into the FEMA Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, which is the source document to get a lot of infrastructure and a lot of assistance in actual doing mitigation projects. So that was the number one. I know in Bridgeport, we did a lot of work subsequent to these workshops at the regional level, but for just Bridgeport and the municipalities, we developed a complete streets policy for the city. We have all access to all these resources too. We did a lot of this in-house just based on my work at the university and all the stuff that we've been doing. So yeah, complete streets policies was one way they took it. Taking a look at, you know, aligning with the regional long-range transportation plan, which is obviously what the, you know, regional WestCog in this area does. But one thing that we found is by having a clear understanding of what you're experiencing from a natural hazard perspective, you could actually leverage transportation funds to help mitigate some of these improvements that DPW identifies. So having a close alignment there was something that we really worked on. But I think, as you know, Darlene mentioned too, the relationships that you developed, that was what the real value came, because we were able to identify these small grants, sort of like the ones we received from Nature Conservancy, understanding what Circa had available. And that's what led ultimately when we got the money for Resilient Bridgeport, you know, after Hurricane Sandy. I mean, that was a huge investment of $10 million. And a lot of this was what started that. So you don't know where it's going to go fully at the start, but I think starting this discussion is the most important piece of the puzzle.
Great. Do you have any recommended next actions for this committee in the next month or so that we ought to be thinking about?
Personally, I think, you know, if we could pull together some of our recommendations, I think that'd be nice for you all to kind of take a look at. I think if you have the bandwidth to do a little bit of digging in terms of what you like and what your key goals are, your most important target areas, and you feed that to us, we're happy to look into things further. I mean, this is a passion of mine. It has been for years. And I think our staff, we're ready to assist with it all. I can think of that more, Lisa. I think it's just, you know, trying to figure out, you know, which way to go with, you know, I always make a joke, you know, don't confuse movement for progress. So trying to figure out how best to kind of use our time wisely and move things forward.
I agree with that. I'm guilty as charged. So, great. Any other thoughts before I let everybody go and get ready for our council meeting? Thank you guys so much for this inaugural meeting. Thanks for the good ideas. Are you waving goodbye or do you have a thought? He's ready to go. Mr. Meek is ready to
No
go.
thoughts.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Any thoughts that you have for our next meeting? All ears. And thanks again, Brian and Katie, for all the help.
Well, thank you all. Nice to see you.
Thanks.
Night.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.
See you soon.